Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. Our guest today is Pierre Conessa, who's a former senior defense ministry official here in France. He's a lecturer at the Institute of Political Science in Paris and the author of a book, it's only published in France for now, by Robert Laffont, and it's called, if I may translate it, The Manufacturing of the Enemy, or How to Kill with a Clean Conscience. A very interesting topic. Mr. Conessa, welcome.
Hello.
You quote a former advisor to the last Soviet leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, in 1989, as saying to the West, we're making you the worst of presents, we're depriving you of an enemy. Why is an enemy so much needed?
In a way, I would say that an enemy is serving a lot, because, you know, it could be just to identify the entity in which you live, because by opposition you say, well, this guy is not mine, this guy is my enemy. It can also serve for political people, I mean, to explain that they are defending the community against the enemy. The last example we had to live was Greece. You know how the Greek leaders were explaining that Turkey were threatening them, you know that, and it was a condition of very big expense of military armaments. And it can also serve if you want to denounce a part of your own society. For example, if you're a guy explaining the world through the conspiration theory, you know, so you have a lot of explanation to help you to say that I'm belonging to a community and this guy is not mine, you know, or this entity is not my entity.
But I want to come back. You mentioned the Soviet Union through this quote, which was a clearly identified enemy for decades through the Cold War. In a way, a reassuring one. This obviously is not the case anymore. However, people were really concerned about such an enemy, but you say, well, at least we knew him.
Well, you know, was more interesting in the process by which, you know, the two powers, the two superpowers, were working one against the other. I mean, they were using exactly the same strategic concept, you know. You are with us or against us. For example, you remember that we were sustaining a lot of dictators, explaining that they were pro-West dictators, so they were good guys. And if they were balancing, for example, like Siad Barre, suddenly they became an enemy. So you had exactly the same explanation of the world. You know, you have to adopt a position on one camp or on the other camp. They were not looking at the crisis by their own local geographical roots. They were just asking if Taliban were pro-West or pro-East, you remember. That's process of strategic analysis, which was the focus of my book. So I don't want to say that there are no enemies on the earth, no. But I want just to explain that to make war, you know, you need to be at least two, which means that you agree with your enemy, you know, to say, well, we are ready to use violence. That's the point. I'm not talking about, you know, the guy with whom you have no agreement. No, that's the process by which you convince your community that the violence is the only solution. That's exactly what the...
Well, I want to take some concrete example. The most recent one is Muammar Gaddafi.
Yes.
He's an interesting character, or he was, I should say, in many ways, because for years he was the devil, a pariah, then he became someone you could work with, and then suddenly again a pariah. How would you describe the process?
I would say that Gaddafi was in a way what I could call a rich dictator. It was exactly the same case than Saddam Hussein, for example, because, you know, you can look at him sometimes as an enemy. It was the case during the terrorist attack, for example, but it could become suddenly a rich consumer. And it was in last year, you know, when he was 2 years ago, when he was in Paris, when he was in Rome, when he was in Madrid, suddenly he became, you know, the guy who was a very interesting banknote, you know. So that's explained to you that the process of conviction for the public opinion is to explain sometimes that he's a very bad guy, and sometimes you can discuss with him. So what's the truth?
But it is an interesting process. Gaddafi is one example. Right now, there is the issue of Bashar al-Assad in Syria, who is also someone who was welcome in France and some other Western countries, and now is seen as the devil. How does that work? How do you construct, manufacture an enemy, at least with the public opinion? Is this just the media, other people? How does that work?
I think that it depends the case of conflict you're facing. Usually the strategist, what the American analysts used to call the strategist, I mean official organization and private one, like think tanks, like historians, like geographics, etc. They all contribute to identify your own entity, your own nation, your own collectivity. And for example, when you are in a border dispute, so what's a border precisely? Border for us, I mean for European, means a line which you pass through without any problem. But in some part of the world, they are explaining that your country has very historical rights on this part of the country, that the geography is explaining to you that you have the right to get, you know, this kind of position. For example, I was in South America last year, and I was discussing with people about the conflict which was happened between Ecuador and Peru. It was in a part of the country in which it was just forest. Nobody has gone there. But they were just having a theoretical line. So they had the conflicts for a country which nobody knows precisely. And I was discussing with a taxi driver in Quito. And I said, what's about this conflict? He said, well, the Peruvian has attacked us. So, you know, the explanation for the people, which probably knows nothing about the conflict, he was explaining that he was right. You understand?
But I just want to, I mean, there are old conflicts like this one or Israel-Palestine where you learn in school, I would say, about the enemy, the reasons for the enmity. But when you have suddenly to shift from an ally to an enemy, does public opinion, which is better informed now through the new media and so on, accept this easily in many ways for governments who want to push the issue?
Well, you know, in strategic affairs, you have a very fruitful concept, which is a dual standard. Just let me take an example. For example, the Morocco is asking to Spain to give back the Presidia, you know, all these small cities which are on the coast of Morocco. And Spain was explaining that the historical right of the country impinged them to give back these small cities. But they are asking to Great Britain to give back Gibraltar. So, you know, they are explaining to people coming from Spain that they are right regarding the Morocco affairs, but the Great Britain is wrong, you know, about Gibraltar. And you have a lot of examples like that. You are explaining that this guy is a very good guy because he's on your side, and you're explaining that the same guy could be suddenly an enemy because he's just passing on the other side of the
right, situation. But how does it work to switch from someone who is seen as friendly to suddenly the devil? I mean, who is really at the core of this transformation? Is it us, the media? Is it some commentators, or is it just politicians?
Well, it's a mix. I mean, the media can contribute, but you have a strategic affairs directorate which are in charge to detect what could be the threat, what could be the risk, what could be the opportunity, and to decide what's the defense system you have to adopt. That is the official slide, you know, of the process. But you have also a lot of people contributing to define an enemy and to change if it's necessary. Just remember, for example, the case of Saddam Hussein. He was the guy which was presented as a modernist, as a secularian power, etc.
Against Iran.
Against Iran, because he was against Iran. But as soon as he has invaded Kuwait, which is not exactly what I could call a democracy, suddenly all the world was fighting against him to free Kuwait. What does that mean, to free Kuwait? Because, you know, it's not no more a democracy today. So you understand what you can explain, how you can explain in some case, and you can convince that it could be very useful to make war, and sometimes not.
Just one last question. In your book, you kind of go against the notion that democracies are less into wars, that they are more peaceful.
Well, no one can say that democracy are peaceful by nature, and that dictators are, I would say, making war just by nature. You have some dictators which are quite peaceful, like, for example, Salazar regime in Portugal. But you have democracy, like, for example, United States, where we have decided precisely to invade Iraq without any evidence. It was a lie. So we have a big demonstration that no one can take as a principle that democracy are peaceful. Some democracy are not, some are not.
Okay. Okay, it's a complicated world, and thank you for coming on the France 24 interview to try to give us your explanations, and thank you for watching the edition. Stay tuned for more news here on France 24.